morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's Weekly Energy Boost. My name is Elishaba, and I am here with Daniel, who is back with us after a very long hiatus.
Did you miss me?
We did miss you, absolutely. And I speak on behalf of all of our listeners when I say, glad you're here. Because at least here in America, we are entering a season that is full of family and gatherings and seeing people we don't see the rest of the year. And every year we try to find a time to bring in family-focused tips and tools from the teachings and wisdom of Kabbalah. And this week it works perfectly because the energy of the week is actually very much about generational healing, and that's what we're here to talk about. Weekly Energy Boost is a 7-day spiritual weather forecast where we provide our listeners with the most practical and powerful tools to navigate the coming 7 days through the wisdom and tools of Kabbalah. And every episode inevitably reveals powerful wisdom and tools you can use anytime. And this obviously no different. We're specifically talking about generational healing, which is not a topic that we fully delved into with Daniel. And I think that the best place to start is actually to ask you, Daniel, how does generational healing differ from individual?
Yeah, thank you. So individual healing will focus on, as the wording says, the individual. So we will look at, okay, so what are we dealing with? What kind of symptoms show up? What kind of emotions do you have? Et cetera, et cetera. The big difference in generational healing is we will look at the individual in the context of the generation and the family system. So we're not just looking at the person that is in front of us. And it's sort of like the image that I always have in mind when I work one-on-one with people is I look at the person, I listen to their words deeply, but also imagine like what must have happened to those who came before him or her. So we're putting the individual in the context of the family system, and we're including all the different events that happened in the family system and in the generations. And of course, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and digging. Events, people who lived something similar that you live. Who else did that happen? Who else suffered a tremendous loss? Who else felt abandoned? Those kind of questions are usually coming up. So we're not just looking what is your experience, but we're always assuming that it did not start with you. There were experiences, events, and people that lived something very similar. And so that is the big difference between personal and generational healing approach.
So how does the issues or whatever is unresolved in our ancestors, how does that get carried down to us? How does it even become part of our own tikkun or baggage or spiritual work?
Yeah. So, and it has a lot to do also with trauma work, because usually something is being passed down, or we can recognize, as we learn in Kabbalah, tikkun. Tikkun has this quality of repetition. Something is being repeated. And there's a lot of similarities in tikkun and trauma work, because when something is so painful that it couldn't be processed, and so those who experience it didn't have the capacity to process it, so their incapacity of processing it is what allows the trauma or the tikkun to continue to travel in the generational system, in the family system, until someone comes around and says, ooh, I want to heal that. I want to pick up on that. And, we need to be careful with that, because sometimes people think that it's a very heroic thing, I'm going to heal my generational trauma, tikkun. I'm going to be the one that, and we need to be very careful with that, because oftentimes we will pay, or the person that picks that will pay a big price. Okay? And there is already naturally built in this need in all children mostly, and we're all children of someone, that need to save, that need to fix, that need to rescue. My parents suffered, so I don't want them to suffer. I will take that on. And the reason why it's been traveling and it's been passed on, because the people that were responsible to heal that didn't. So out of love and loyalty, the generations that come after will pick on that and say, I will heal it for you. And this is dangerous. It is dangerous because there will always be a big price to pay. So the way we're looking at it is we don't heal someone else's trauma or someone else's tikkun. That is impossible. But what is a possibility is to break the cycle of that trauma. So for instance, let's give examples. Things that can be passed down can be things such as abuse or addictions or feelings of abandonment, let's say. So there are events that are linked to that, people that came before me that experienced that. And because they didn't have the capacity or the tools to process the pain, to overcome the addiction, to overcome the feelings of abandonment, will come another person later on that will pick up on that. But we need to be clear that they cannot. So if my mother felt the feelings of abandonment, or my grandfather survived war and experienced tremendous pain that he was never able to process, and as a result feels shut down in order to protect himself from that pain, or even to function, those feelings of shut down or these fears of abandonment that I now experience as mine, that didn't start with me. And this is part of the healing process, is allowing the person to see that it's not yours and that you are not responsible to heal that. And this is when the healing starts happening, when we start to put things in their place. And that is where my healing happens. But when I heal, it's not that I heal their pain. They're the grown-ups and responsible. They had their chance. I am not responsible to heal their pain. All I can do is to end the cycle of abuse, the cycle of addiction, the cycle of depression, shutting down, anxiety, whatever that might be.
Now, we learn, the Kabbalists teach, there's a tremendous wealth of knowledge about what happens to the soul, what the soul experiences between lifetimes, right? How the soul will select its circumstances and the work that it's going to do in the upcoming lifetime, down to choosing when to be born, is to have the right astrological makeup and the right opportunities. Where does choosing to be responsible for an ancestor's or trauma, let's say, where does that happen? Is that like a physical process? Meaning, I read also outside of the teachings of Kabbalah, there's I forget how it's called now, of course, and it's important, but it's like in the physical DNA, there is a transfer of trauma, like a muscle memory almost. It's carried from generation to generation through the physical DNA of the individual. How does or why would a person take on generational trauma?
So that is the realm of the soul and the realm of tikkun before the soul comes into this world. So as you said, I think you mentioned it right now, that we're reincarnating as groups of souls. And so as groups of souls, we can have a collective soul, group soul tikkun. And that group soul tikkun can be related to that generational tikkun that is being passed on, right? So if my soul knows, okay, my individual tikkun is depression, or my individual tikkun is a certain fear of loss, or my individual tikkun is overcoming anger. So I will choose, the soul will sign the soul contract, and will choose very carefully and precisely in perfect order and synchronicity the family and the groups of souls that it will be born into. And then everything else follows, right? Everything else is already an effect of that. So, of course, with Kabbalah, we go deeper and we go to the roots of cause of all causes, which is the soul level and the soul contract before even coming into this world.
I want to step away from the family discussion, because when I think of the word generation, I think of the people who were born at the same time as me, rather than my generation or me giving baggage to my kids or me taking on baggage from my parents or my grandparents. Do we have a generational healing to do as well? The people that born, in the, I won't say how old I am, but around the time that I was born, do we have a shared healing to do as well?
Yeah, there's same generation tikkun as well. Although I wouldn't be able to classify it in terms of like, oh, generation Z has this tikkun, millennials have this tikkun. Although we can see, yeah. Although with closer look, we can definitely notice certain things, but a little bit of a larger context, because it depends on how we look at generations, right? I mean, there's a lot of Kabbalistic insights as far as the tikkun and the tikkun of each generation. We know that in many years past, the generations was on a much higher elevated level, right? There was a time of the prophets. There was a time of where more people had divine inspiration. And then like slowly but surely that all those levels faded. And Kabbalistically, we are in the generation that is healing the lower parts, right? So the Kabbalist gives the context of correcting Adam and Eve, the body of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve is a code word for all the souls, all the collective souls is one body, is Adam and Eve. And if you take it sort of like as a metaphor, this body of Adam and Eve that we're all part of, some are coming from the part of the brain of Adam and Eve, some come from the legs, those are the athletes and the runners, and the brains are the philosophers, right? Rabbi Isaac Luria talks a great deal about it. So we are the generation of the heel. And the generation of the heel, we might have talked about in some of the episodes. No? Okay. It just might.
I know this, but I love you for sharing it.
Yeah. So we're the generation of the heel. So the Kabbalah shares great paradoxes about this generation, the generation of the heel, which is on the one hand, if you consider the body, it's the lowest part. It's sort of like
it's almost always in contact with the ground, whereas the toes stay in the air longer as we step, right?
Right.
That's interesting.
And on the other hand, it's the foundation. Like without a heel, the whole body will collapse. So this is the paradox of our generation. Our generation, on the one hand, is kind of the lowest of the low, but it's only because of the lower soul and all the souls that come now. It doesn't mean less than, and we need to be careful with that. We're not less than. Actually, could be quite the opposite. It is those lower level souls that are just more coarse, that those are the ones that will have the responsibility, as the Kabbalah says, to bring the end, the Gemara Tikkun, the finishing of the correction. So the light that the lower souls will reveal, and this is the big paradox, is greater light than greater souls that came before us. Kind of hard to wrap our mind around it.
It's definitely counterintuitive, but at the same time, it does make sense. And I think you see it in our time where, on one hand, there's great darkness, conflict. People are definitely feeling free to be terrible to one another. But there's also never been a time in history where spirituality was more prevalent, more available, more on the market than it is today. So you have on this almost like this polarity that's taking place of extreme darkness, but also extreme light. And I feel that that's what's even allowing us to have a conversation like this in front of everybody is we're ready to heal. We're ready to finish the job. We're ready to end the cycles. And I wonder if you could share with us some suggestions on how do we begin even that conversation of what do we heal? me personally, I have an idea, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners are curious about how to begin to understand what of their healing is generational trauma and what of their healing is individualized work.
And it will always be connected.
Right.
It will always be connected. One more word about generational to go for our time. I forgot which Kabbalist where I saw that, but I remember reading it somewhere in some Kabbalistic writings, also related to our generation, that the main thing, there's a section in the Zohar, the main thing in our time, the generation of the Gemara Tikkun, the end of the correction, the biggest Tikkun is fear and self-doubt. I believe it resonates with me strongly. I read it in the Zohar, and it's think about it. Fear and self-doubt is something, again, if you're here in this time, this is a collective tikkun, right? This is the collective tikkun of this generation, regardless of millennials or baby boomers. If you're here alive, fear and self-doubt, this is sort of like a collective tikkun that we're struggling with and you're meant to overcome. Back to your question. How do we trace it? Where do we begin?
I can imagine listeners who are on a spiritual journey, they might not have parents who are excited to talk about what happened in the past, or I'm always hearing stories about how secrets are revealed by accident and it throws everybody into a spiral. I imagine that there is a proactive way to open up, or maybe my question is, do you even have to have those conversations?
Yeah. There's no general rule because every family is different, but what one can say is, yes, of course, there are so many family secrets and there's so many things that we don't know. There's probably more things that we don't know than we know, right? So we need to check, first of all, what is the level of openness of my family to talk about it. Then we need to check what is good timing, right? With Thanksgiving weekend this week. Is this a good timing or people need to be, as we learn in Kabbalah, there needs to be a vessel. There needs to be an opening and sensitivity as well. But in general, we can say that it is good when we can find an opening. It is good to talk about things as much as possible, as much as it is allowed, because the more something in our family remains a secret and is not talked about, remember, the family system is sort of like, has its own conscious, and it's like an energy field. So when something happened, but it's not talked about, the more we conceal it, the more it strengthens itself in its energy, in its presence, the more dominant it becomes, and the conscious of the family system seeks to be acknowledged. Like the events, they seek to be acknowledged. So the more undercurrent it goes, the more it becomes a hidden dynamic, the more likely it is that someone from the family system will come and pick it up, but pick it up most of the time in a destructive way, pick it up as a symptom. So, for instance, give you an example. There was an early death of someone in the family, maybe a stillborn child, and it was too painful for the mother and father. They didn't know how to communicate it with the children, so it was just shoved under the carpet, never talked about. Now, the kids that come after, whether it was talked about or not, they know. The soul knows, they feel it. And if it's not talked about, then they can potentially, the children that come after, can take on, in honor of their past sibling, in their honor, they can take on feelings of feeling abandoned or feeling unrecognized. Nobody looks at me. And it's actually what the soul that passed early feels. But because it's not talked about, the system said, if you're not going to talk about it proactively, I'm going to delegate it to family members, and it's mostly the most sensitive family members, and the ones that want to be of service. They will pick it up and said, I will make the entire family look at me by doing this, sometimes even by developing suicidal thoughts, so that you will acknowledge that person that was excluded from the family system. So from a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to, if there's an opening and if we can, to lift the family secrets, it's healing for the entire family and for generations.
So once, let's say you have this conversation, we put it on the table, whatever the issue or whatever's unresolved is on the table, what does the healing journey look like?
Yeah. So again, it's hard to make general statements, but what we can say in maybe general way, that the first step will always be acknowledgement. This is like the biggest part of the healing. It's just so that family stop looking away. The family members stop looking away from the pain, because most of the time it's something painful that happened that is not being acknowledged. So just the fact that we acknowledge the person that was abandoned or rejected or excluded, the event that was so painful that nobody talks about, the fact that it's been acknowledged releases a huge amount of healing energy for everybody in the system. The second step will be to accept it, to accept it as part of our history, right? So the problem is when family members try to erase something from the family history. Oh, that never happened. We don't talk about it. So first acknowledge, then it did happen. And the acceptance releases the victims and the perpetrators. It releases the judgment. It releases the blame, because these are all symptoms that are being taken as a result of that because it wasn't accepted.
You know, I'm smiling because in last week's episode, we talked about how important when something tragic or traumatic happens, that it's so important to accept it first. And we spoke about it in different terms, the importance of acknowledging it, recognizing it, not rushing to analyze or to shift conscious, but really taking a moment to look at it in the face for what it is. It is, not giving it the good or bad, not telling, you know, and allowing the emotional response, not fighting it, not suppressing it. It has to happen in order for us to do with it what it's meant to do. And I feel like you're saying the same message, that first step of acceptance, if it didn't happen in real time when the actual incident or situation took place in history, it ends up coming out in another way somewhere else where it doesn't necessarily belong.
100%. Then as a last step, it could be good for the person that is able to acknowledge and to accept it, or a group that is able to acknowledge and accept it. It could be good to create a path of how do we move forward with this? Because remember, the repetition happens because it wasn't able to be acknowledged, accepted, and then processed and move forward with in a good way. So it's important that we're not just dealing with the past, but we're always coming back to the here and now. And how can I take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of me now, with myself, with my family? How can I honor all those events that happened in the past, or the people that suffered, the people that maybe even the people that were the perpetrators, right? That everyone blames them, right? How can I move forward in a better way? Because that's what really the solution is, right? We're not just looking in the past and talking about the family secrets because we want to stay stuck there. We want a better evolution. We want to move forward in a better way. And this is a very important part that many times I see some people are missing. It's very easy to get trapped in the past and keep on talking about it and keep on reminding ourselves and stay a victim. And so the most important last part is, how do we move forward? How can I honor the ones that were left behind in a better way? Not through self-sabotage and by carrying on, by taking on what they felt and honoring them by also feeling neglected, by also carrying depression, by also carrying whatever that might be. But yes, you had a very difficult destiny and very difficult things happened to you. Yeah, you weren't acknowledged, or you didn't have the means to process the pain. But I can. And so I won't forget you. You know, I also cannot change your destiny or your past, but I will make sure that your suffering or your pain or your challenges, that they weren't in vain. So in your honor, I will do good things in your honor. And that can have many possibilities for how one can do that, paying it forward, doing good things in their name and their behalf. But that creates a different pathway, even in our mind, to be able to move forward in a more peaceful way.
Is there a particular person or, you know, somebody that you led on this journey, a story, real life situation that you can share with us? Of course, without names, but
yeah, every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many every day. One that I can think of recently is a person that actually we mentioned a similar example. They had a sibling being put in an institution because from birth, and she was very young at that time, put in an institution because she was born with Down syndrome, and it was in many years ago. And she's never seen her sibling, never seen her. And she passed away then from pneumonia, like when she was 2.5 years old. And the sibling, yeah. And only like 30 years later, her sister saw even a picture of her, right? So in the session, we didn't start with that, but we started to explore like what are the things that you want to work with, what are the symptoms that you're carrying, and so we discovered a lot of things of like fear of abandonment, fear of feeling lonely, and we're able to trace and to link it to that event and to that family member. And this is not just intellectual process. Oh yeah, makes sense. No, this is something that we're processing in a meditation. We're processing it in visualization. So the individual, it's not just theory. If it's not felt in the body, it means that maybe it's something else, and we need to investigate more things. But it became very clear that this is the link. So so we're doing a visualization, and we are acknowledging that soul that came, and we're giving her a place in the family. I'm sorry that our parents didn't have the capacity. It was too painful for them, but it's never too late. Now I can give you your place, and you will always be my little sister. And so just by speaking out these sentences and energetically giving that soul a space, I don't need to occupy that space anymore for her by different ways. So we honor her destiny, what she lived. We're giving her a space, and then we say, and I'll give you a good place in my heart, and you won't be forgotten. And the way that I will keep you in my heart is by every time I will do X, Y, and Z, I will think about you. Every time I will, help people with these disabilities, I will think you will be honored through that. So this is, one way in which we can create healing and stop different self-sabotaging ways of keeping those people alive.
It's interesting because in the work that we do with students that are on this path and trying to live the wisdom of Kabbalah, sometimes you come across something. We often talk about limiting beliefs, limiting behaviors. Even in the previous episodes you were on, we dug pretty deep in those things. But sometimes you come to something and a person will say, I don't know why I do that.
Yeah.
Right? It's a belief or a perception or a habit or a behavior that isn't rooted in this lifetime's experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. And especially those things that I don't know why I do that. I don't know where it's coming from. It's most of that linked to someone in my generation, my family system that I do it for. And we always say that the force of the family system that I'm a part of and that I want to belong to in a very deep human way, the human need to belong. This is our tribe. This is how I feel safe. That force of the family system wanting to include everybody, and I want to be included in it, that force is stronger than the individual force. So what does it mean? That as much as I know I shouldn't self-sabotage with guilt, I shouldn't self-sabotage, but every time I hit a certain goal and it becomes too good to be true, I experience loss. It's like, but I can't help it. I can't help it, but every time I meet a person that I really love, somehow I do something for them to leave me. Why is it? I don't understand it. It's like there's something deeper that I'm loyal to. Someone else in my family wasn't allowed to be in a good relation, never had a good relationship. So in order to associate with them and to prove my loyalty to them, I will also deprive myself of good relationships. I deprive myself of having abundance, right? It's like, even though my individual force says, I want to be in a good relationship, and my individual power and cognitive thinking says, I want to be abundant, that force of the system of wanting to be a part takes over until we acknowledge it, until we pay attention to that force and what's driving us. Then and only then free will can kick in, and I can acknowledge that and honor that, and then utilize my own free will and say, yeah, but I can. Maybe you didn't have, and it's okay, but I have a different destiny. I can do it this way. I can do it differently, and I can break the cycle.
So powerful. Yeah. So how do people, if someone wants to work on generational healing, what do you suggest? What's the best way to go about it?
By themselves or with the help of someone?
How can we help them? How can they prepare for a fruitful healing? And then what are the steps that you?
Yeah. So if you're by yourself, I would listen to this episode and then write down the questions that we said, right? Like, who did it start with? Who else experienced it? Those are kind of the opening questions, assuming that whatever I'm experiencing, it's not the first time it's happening, right? So we're looking for people, events, pain that's traveling in the system, repetitions, crazy things. I hear many times of repetitions of like, this happened on that date. My grandfather passed away, and on that date, my child was born. Like they're always like this. So sometimes we can look for dates as well in order to find connections of how patterns are being repeated. Those are some of the ways that we can prepare for it. And in a one-on-one Tikkun healing session, all you need to come is prepared with, the symptom, the topic, the breakthrough that you're looking for, the pattern that you notice. And then we will first ask a bunch of questions. We want to dig. We never assume in these sessions. We never assume, that's what it is. Because each case is different and we need to be sensitive to that. So we will personalize it for you. We'll ask a lot of questions to begin with, and making sure that it's processed also for you in a good way. In the second half in the session, we most of the time do some sort of either meditation or visualization with speaking out loud of healing sentences, also that we can process it in a deeper level and allow healing to enter.
I'm actually thinking I should mention that sometimes you go into a session thinking you're going to work on something,
right?
And another symptom or another incident actually comes out and says, no, this is where the work is.
Yeah, more often than not, it's okay.
So just if anybody does take the leap and decide to do this work, even though you may go into it thinking this is where the work is and this is what I want to heal, that force that you were talking about is so strong, it will come out and say, this is where the healing is. Focus here either first, or there's nothing over there actually. It's just a result of what's happening in this area. So
yeah,
it's an interesting experience when something invisible and almost indescribable takes over and drives the process. And then you really feel it's how deep and profound it is.
It is a real revelation each time. And I love to discover these aha moments together and be part of that. And it's fascinating to me each time. But more important is what's the follow-up and the result after, right? But the first one is most of the time a big, wow, I didn't connect these dots. I didn't see that, but now I feel it. Now I know that. And now I have more free will, actually. I can choose in a better way. I have more clarity. With the clarity, I can make different choices. Very powerful.
Just to give what we're talking about context, Daniel and a team of our teachers at the Kabbalah Centre specialize in what we call tikkun healing, which is more of the unconscious and deeper seated tikkuns that we may be carrying, whether from previous lifetimes on our own or, as we've been talking about today, generational stuff. So this is something that you can participate in, whether with Daniel or one of our other instructors. You can visit weeklyenergyboost.com to find the link there and more information about how you can participate, sign up. Sometimes it's one session, sometimes it's multiple sessions, but either way, there is a system and a structure to this work. And I don't want anyone to feel like we're just saying, okay, now heal yourselves. We're here to hold your hand and help you through it and give you the tools to continue on your healing journey. Weekly Energy Boost is available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. You could follow us on those platforms to receive even more content to support you in your journey and what we talk about every week. At our website, weeklyenergyboost.com, you can find out more about tikkun healing and Daniel's work. You can find out about all the other things we think are important for our listeners to know about. You can search through our archives, send us a message, and click the donate button to help make our podcast possible. But especially with an episode like this, really the most powerful thing you can do is share it. The more people that embark on a healing journey, the better the world is going to be. So thank you, Daniel, for being with us again.
Thank you.
See you next week on the Weekly Energy Boost.